Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. Welcome, Sara McInnes.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me here.
I'm so excited that you are here. I'm going to introduce you really quick. Sara is a fiction and nonfiction writer who graduated from UNC Chapel Hill with a degree in women's studies. Her experience raising her differently wired son has led her to write about embracing and supporting people with autism and ADHD. Her writing can be found in Medium publications and on The Mighty. And Sara, that's how I found you. And I'm a big fan of your writing. And I know
Thank
a lot
you.
of our, yes, of course. No, thank you for writing. We're coming together today because you don't care about your child's grades. And that is probably bringing up some feelings for our watchers and listeners, because grades have been around forever, right?
Yes, and we put so much importance on them.
We really do. And it's like, why is your grade this? Or you should try harder. Or, why did this assignment, did you fail? Or, all these things. And it makes us as parents and educators and therapists like really concerned, because we often feel like grades are representative of, a child's learning and their progress, and if they're doing well or not. We come up with all of these assumptions because this is sort of the traditional way we do things in the school system, right? So let's first talk about why grades may be a poor predictor of success after high school.
Yeah, and I think the word you used, assumptions, is a really good one, because we have these assumptions that good grades mean that a kid is going to do well after high school. And good grades have been shown to be not a great predictor of future success, mostly because predictors of future success are the positive qualities like knowing how to work hard and perseverance and self-motivation, self-discipline, and that's not necessarily correlated with good grades.
That's true. And I'm sure it's probably interesting for you specifically because grades weren't really hard for you. I mean, schoolwork wasn't hard for you.
Schoolwork came very easily to me. I was evaluated in kindergarten and placed into the gifted program, and school grades came very easy for me. And I didn't have to work hard for grades. And I thought that my good grades and my easy success would continue after high school, and it didn't happen that way. And looking back now, I can see that I didn't learn those positive traits of how to work hard and how to persevere. And everybody thought that I would do well after high school because of my good grades, and it just doesn't correlate that way.
I think you have such an excellent point, because when we also think about doing something in your work that brings you joy, that is a passion for you, a lot of times differently wired children have very exciting interests. All the grades don't necessarily in history or biology predict that they're going to do well at the work that they love.
Right.
So I think that's something that we have to think about as well. And like you said, there's a lot of things that come in addition to grades. It's how do you learn to keep trying when things are hard? Like you said,
exactly.
Perseverance. Yes. And, what the expectations are after school. And absolutely, that is not necessarily that if you have good grades that predicts future success, like you said. And I think that's something that we have to consider, because with grades, when we see them, a lot of us again have this like physiological reaction. I was just looking at my oldest son's grades the other day, and we were looking back over his last semester. And, it's interesting. He would have, these low grades, and then some would be higher. And then he had a hard time kind of understanding why those differences were there. And he was feeling bad about that. But we're going to get into that a little bit later. But having to address that with them, because this isn't easy for a lot of them. We also talk about kids with learning differences, and we know differently wired kids are much more likely to have a learning disability. We know this. This is fact. And that's another reason why grades may be an inaccurate representation of their knowledge and progress. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. For one thing, even something like anxiety affects how my son might do on, his tests. And a lot of our kids have issues with anxiety. And so how he does on a test is not an accurate representation of what he has learned or what he's capable of.
Exactly. When I think about this, I think about a situation with my younger son who has writing differences and processing differences, and is just a specific example of spelling tests. So this can be really hard for differently wired kids when they don't process information in the same way, and then they're graded on their writing of the spelling word. He was failing over and over again with spelling, and he was feeling so bad about it. And a lot of times, I know how he learned. So a lot of times we would practice his spelling while he was running around, and he would just say the word. And I knew he knew it. I knew he knew how to spell the words because he
Right.
would spell them for me. So I had asked the teachers, please ask him orally. And they said, we probably can't do that for all of the questions or all of the words, but we're going to go back. And if he does miss these questions or these words, we're going to come back and ask him orally. And it went from failing to A's and B's. So when we think about the way children learn, we're not often testing them in the way they learn.
That's so true. And it could be things like you said with the difference between oral versus writing. It could be, like the anxiety. And the fact that your kids' grades went from F's to A's and B's, it really underscores how meaningless that grade is in terms of what is your kid actually learning and what is your kid capable of.
Right. And, also looking, and again, there's so many factors to consider, like timing of a test, right? Mm-hmm. That can create lots of anxiety.
Yes.
And even sometimes in IEPs, if we write extended time, what does that even mean? How do we do that? Exactly. That can look very different for different kids in different situations and different teachers. And I think teachers really do want to do the best. I mean, I love some good teachers. I'll tell you, they are my superheroes. And they get this concept, right? But it's also they're in a situation, a tough spot where this is part of their job and what is expected, and sort of the, again, traditional way that we look at how to decide how much somebody knows. But again, that's probably based on neurotypical kids.
Right.
Right? This isn't based on our kids. So that just makes it even more difficult, I think, for teachers. And Also, we were mentioning earlier too about how this impacts their mental health with anxiety. Anxiety is more likely to occur, for them to get another diagnosis of anxiety is not rare at all for this population. So imagining having to sit in a classroom where there are all these noises or distractions or this sensory discomfort. I mean, there's all these things. And then there was an instruction, but you didn't hear it or it wasn't clear to you. And I'm getting anxious just thinking about that.
Yes, yes, definitely. And like I know this past year when my son was home for virtual schooling, there was one of the standardized tests that he had to take at home, and he had a lot of anxiety about it. And so I had him sit against the wall and cover himself with the heavy drapes that were in my bedroom. So he had like a little tent, and then
Yeah.
he had a scented candle, and he did much better just, being attentive to his sensory needs and his anxiety. And he did much better. And they can't always see that needs to be done in the classroom or how that would be done.
Definitely. And I think too, like you said, grades are very much impacted by these sensory differences. My oldest son with the lights are really hard for him. We have the lights off while we're sitting in the dining room because the lights in there are just too bright for him and he can't enjoy eating. There's so many things that we have to consider because if we require a child to be in an environment that is really difficult for them, how could they possibly do well consistently on a test or a quiz or even an assignment that they need to do in the classroom? A lot of my patients have severe ADHD and they really struggle with sitting. That's so hard for them. And when they're required to sit, all they can think about is sitting. It takes all of their mental and physical energy to be able to sit. And so when we put in that additional instruction, okay, now you need to do this, when everything that they are is concentrating on sitting.
Exactly. Yes.
Yep, they're probably not going to do as well on those tests. And again, just so many different things to think about when we're thinking about a child's individual needs. When it comes to grades, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of children in my practice over the last 22 years. And what I hear over and over again is, I always fail. I never get anything right. Why bother? And that often looks like refusing. That might look through like rushing to get through and not really reading what the instruction is because they just want to have it be over.
And that's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear, and it's heartbreaking to hear that from your own kid. And we had some of that last year with my son, with some of that negative self-talk. Because like you said, if they're not doing well on assignments or on tests, even if it's because of these other issues, they might not necessarily realize that. And instead they internalize this belief that I'm just dumb. I'm just always going to fail. And they start that negative self-talk, and it can start really young, and it's heartbreaking.
It is. I have heard I always fail and now I'm used to it, or some sort of related information from children as early as kindergarten. And when you think about when you're forming that foundation of your self-belief and your self-talk, that's a really tough place to come from. And a lot of times what we'll hear too is refusing, they have to try harder. But really, we're talking about a whole different ballgame. We're now turning it and saying, now not only do you feel bad, but it's your fault. it's your fault because you don't try harder.
Right. Right. That you're not trying hard enough to pay attention. You're not
Exactly.
trying hard enough to, to stay in your seat and do your work. And yeah.
Yep, you're not trying hard enough to focus, or you're capable, but you're choosing not to. That's one that, like, whoo, I get all prickly over. So this idea of everybody's an apple, right? Like we have this grading system, we have these tests, everyone's an apple, we're comparing everyone learns exactly the same, right? But really,
and that sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. It sounds ridiculous when you say it that way.
It does, because it is ridiculous. So we have apples and oranges, and we're saying they're the same. And again, it puts the teacher in a really tough spot, because they have these expectations too. So I feel like it's a whole different way to look at this system and how we approach the grades. And what if a child is learning differently, and what does that look like for them? And again, if we're telling a child over and over again, you're not trying hard enough, even though they are doing the best that they can, they are going to feel so bad about it. So bad. And this impacts everything for them. When we expect them to do something that is unreasonable, and then we tell them they're not trying hard enough, I don't see a good way to look at that situation.
Yeah. It needs us to stop and think about it differently, and to ask teachers to think about it differently, and to like I spoke to you before about how I wanted to reshape my son's experience of school, because what you were just describing, that's kind of how his school life was going. And with the opportunity to have him home, I kind of wanted to reshape that into less of grades and worrying about that, and more just focusing on his learning process.
I love that. And so looking at it in a different way, because kids pay attention. Little kids even pay attention to what other people are getting on their scores, their tests, their assignments. And then they're comparing themselves. Like, I always do poorly. Everybody else does better than me. And I've heard that again over and over again from my patients. And so even within the current system, and hopefully we're moving away and we're making things more individualized, but even in the current system, it's, how did you learn that? How do you think this would be better for you? Was this too long? Which ones were easy? Which ones were hard? So no worries to our listeners and watchers out there. We are coming back to give you strategies of how to make this better. So we're not going to leave you hanging. For sure, we'll be back in another episode. But I think it is really good to even just bring this to the table, that it does not equal bad. This fail or this D or this C, it does not mean that this child is not smart. It does not mean that they are less important. It does not mean they didn't try hard enough. We have to really change that narrative.
Yeah, exactly. And my son has this, he's worried about getting an F. And I'm like, I don't care about the F. That's not something you need to worry about. Let's talk about, this assignment in a different way.
I love that. Because again, it's that worry, like you said, because this represents something that I am not good at. Right. And again, I'm being compared, and look how far that A and that F are away from each other.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of saying, you need to get A's, why didn't you get this grade or whatever? I think, like you said, we have to look at the reason why, and how is it being assessed, and no, your worthiness as a person is not based on this grade. It's not.
Yeah, exactly.
So So good, Sarah. I love it. I know our watchers and listeners are going to want to know more about you. Those I know a lot of people already know, but for those who don't and want to start reading your amazing writings, where can they find you?
Well, thanks so much for that, Holly. I'm on Medium a lot, and I'm very active on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram at Sara McInnes Writes.
So good.
I have my own website too.
Yes, and I am going to include those links below in the show notes, and then that way everybody can find you.
Great. That sounds great.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It was great having you on, and I love this topic, and I think it's incredibly important. And I think a lot of people are going to be thinking of this differently now.
Yeah, that's great, and that's why I write about this. I just want to make people just stop and think about things a little bit differently.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Sarah. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.